Hello there. Those on the YouTube playback, because if you're seeing this, you're on the YouTube playback, as nobody's tuned into the live stream just yet. I might as well ditch the camera for now. So hey, I'm gonna bop around among some screens and things and set up my scenario here. Don't mind me, I'm just pausing the playback on that so that I'm not distracted with a little talking face on the YouTube studio scenario. So welcome to the Airwindows Monday Q&A. Hey Zachary. Up there's somebody, so we'll go to the screen, bada-boom. And you may or may not have seen the poster image, but I have some interesting things in store today, let's just say. A number of things, really. So first of all, I guess I might as well talk about glitch shifter if anybody wants to hear about that. While people filter in, I'm pretty pleased about glitch shifter. Yeah, this image that I have is just my to-do list. It's things that I'm doing today. And kind of think of it, I've just done one. So, yay, check that off. So, Glitch Shifter is the most recent Airwindows plugin. It's the kind of thing where Andy is always like, tell me what is coming out next week. And I'm usually like, no. But in this case, it's because I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but it turned out that working on Glitch Shifter was the correct option, was the correct move, because the thing with that is I was able, through putting a few extra days of work into it, to get it to pitch down as well as up. Hey Keith, do I make channel strips? Kinda. There's one called C-Strip. Have a look at C-Strip. That is a whole collection of little things like it's got a compressor, it's got a gate. I'm actually being asked to break out the gate into a standalone plugin, which I'm very likely to do. It's got some EQ in it. It's got, if I'm not mistaken, a timing nudge. It's got a little sample delay built into it. Hey, easy. So C-Strip is the one you're going to want. Now, I'm also testing out some of my gear. For instance, this is the camera view, which is now right over here, because I'm working on a different camera, namely I'm wondering whether I can't, let me see. I can't tell whether this is in focus or not. I'm wondering whether I can't do some of my soldering work on this new concept of synthesizer building here. And what that'll mean is I gotta move that microphone over, which is not impossible. I can do that. And I'll basically be doing circuitry wiring this way, although it might lead to me working on some of this stuff like here where I normally do. And if I do that, then you can't see what I'm doing. So I'm not quite sure how this camera works. It might be worth fooling around, because the thing about it is this is a nice chair. And yeah, I know I'm way over there. I have to move closer to the microphone now, but I'm going to see whether I can't make something like that happen. And if I move this mic in closer, then I would be able to do that, but it's a question of, yeah, that's comfortable for more long-term building of stuff. And I could always bring it over to this for a close-up. I'm concerned that maybe I might need to get a lens that can focus in really close, because with this is as close as it'll get, so I can show like drawings here. But if I was to try to get really close like this and get a super close-up of some solder thing, if I was to get really close like this and do a super close-up of some kind of solder thing so you could see it up close, the lens isn't good enough to do that. So we'll see. I mean, that's the thing, is that some of this stuff regarding getting the builder streams, where we're getting together and building some crazy analog synthesizer stuff, requires more going on. Keys the Dot is too hard for me to build, although there is open source stuff like Audacity or whatever that is a code base that somebody could use. Yeah, as far as this camera not focusing, no, this is focused in as close as it can. This is like a 50mm lens. It's like a telephoto lens, and this is as close as it'll get. So normally it's for showing regular stuff, and it's not macro capable, this one. It's cool, it's neat in its own way, but it's not macro capable. I can't actually use it for that particular purpose. So in order to do close-ups on a soldering job, and yeah, it's also like, could I stretch this wire around to have that camera there be super close in on the soldering stuff being done? Because part of it is about, I'm going to need to show you folks at least some of the time, and possibly more often than not, hey Bo, how the soldering is actually done. I need to be able to give you a close-up on what is actually going on there, because if this is the thing that it's like, I know this is the kind of live stream where part of it is just hanging out with me for hours while I do that, and I won't be talking as much as like in this Q&A, because I always chat a lot on the Q&A. Is a limited time. It's like an hour and 46. It's tied to how big the Patreon is, so I can stretch it, but it's a limited time. And it's pretty much continuous blathering on from me and answering as many questions as I possibly can in the time that I have. And doing a build stream would have to be more chilled out than that. Like, I'd have to be able to quiet down some of the time and just, do the actual work. And I know that it's entertaining hanging out and just watching a stream like that sometimes. There's a lot of streams like that I've even seen. I know folks that do things like that, even specifically doing soldering. but I do need to be able to show the actual electrical work happening in close-up to do it properly. Although technically I think I'm able to possibly load a video clip into the switcher. I don't really know though. Emma has a question. What class amplifier is hooked up to my studio monitors? That is a Channel Islands D100. It's kind of a fancy pants amplifier, but it's a class that is really quite accessible these days. In fact, it's possible to build some of these things yourself, DIY. It's a Class D amplifier. And the deal with the Class D is it's like a kind of digital amplifier, but it's more like SACD or DSD, direct stream digital, rather than CD or PCM digital. And the way that that works is it's essentially turning on and off a high voltage source insanely fast and kind of pulse width modulating it. So what you get out of that is it's a Class A type behavior, and it's just modulating a very high power source very, very rapidly. It gets a kind of a tube-like sound, honestly. And all the more if you have a high quality power source, because the tone quality of it is also limited by the power source you give it. The reason the Channel Islands, and I've got sort of the first lowest power ones, but I'm only driving NS10, so it's not a bad idea to have more high power amplifier for something low power like NS10s, but I get by fairly well with what I've got. The reason that the Channel Islands are as pricey as they are, which they are, I've had them for many, many years. So it's the kind of thing where you try to get a good thing and then basically just keep it forever and not be constantly churning it. You get used to how it behaves and performs as well. You get used to the tone of it. But also, you manage it once and then you don't have to keep getting more. It's like the Terry Pratchett's Samuel Vimes theory of wealthy people's shoes, which is that in Pratchett's books, he has a character talking about how, a rich person buys a pair of shoes that are really expensive and fancy, but then they last for 20 years. Maybe not 20 years, and a poor person buys much cheaper shoes, but has to buy like 50 of them in the same time period and ends up spending more. And this is really true. That is how it works. So that's kind of my studio monitors and the amplifiers. The monitors are basically just NS10s. I'd like to also get into DIYing speakers because I've always done that. And it seems to me that there could be fun things to do that way. But the monitors are Class D. That is the class that they are. I'm getting a scattering. I'm going to move onwards to what is being shown in the poster frame for the video at some point, and that's going to be darn well exciting. But I'm getting lots of questions, so I'll answer those while people continue to filter in. As far as if your computer is causing electrical interference with your audio, that will depend. Like, do you mean on a capture card inside the computer, like a PC inside the computer, and it's picking up sound from also inside the computer? That can be a problem. If it's my microphone is too near the computer and it makes a noise, that you need to move your microphone farther away from the computer. Basically, you just need space. Although you can also put a choke, which is like a radio frequency damper, onto your mic cable or whatever it is that is picking up the noise. And it'll also depend upon what kind of thing you're using. Like The mic that I've got is pretty well shielded, but it's very pricey and stuff. It's possible to get a choke that might suppress some of the computer noise, but that's really the whole deal with how this kind of stuff, when stuff gets fancy, it's usually because they're going to great lengths to deal with stuff like that. Like my mixer. You're hearing me through a microphone through basically the mixer, the mix down thing that I would have for analog mixing purposes. And it'll mix stuff off on my computer if I want it. But this mixer does not have an internal power supply. What it has is an extension cable that's a sort of weird plug for the cable. And that goes back to a kind of wall wart that sits 6 foot away from the actual mixer. And Heritage Audio did that on purpose to suppress power supply noise coming in. And that is one of the things, like this is also why you would have to move stuff physically away from your computer cabinet. It's the same reason that Heritage, in their design for their mixer, is moving their power supply, the giant wall wart that it is, far away from the actual mixer itself, instead of having it contained within the rather large cabinet that it is. That's just how that stuff works. You move relevant things away from the interference-causing things. You have your computers in another room, which I don't, but that's what when people do that kind of thing. You have your analog circuitry away from digital circuitry, all kinds of stuff like that. M's question, so with the pulse width modulation of Class D amplification, there is a filter for the high frequency signal. That filter doesn't create crossover distortion. In some cases, there's barely even a filter. Like you can get primitive Class D stuff that's designed to run with basically just a simple full range driver, because the simple full range driver is just not capable of putting out high frequencies at like 250K or whatever. A primitive Class D implementation might be running at 250K. I think a fancier one might go up even higher in frequency. But that's the thing, is usually there's a little coil, which might be a little tiny air coil. It's not even a very heavy, it's a heavy wire because it has to handle big powerful speaker outputs, but it's not a very large coil, and a little tiny capacitor, and that's enough to severely inhibit 250 kilohertz, even at that output level. And from that point on, you're just trusting the speaker to not be able to react to things at that high of a frequency. So that's more or less how that works, is Class D, also known as tripath chips. Tripath is a kind of Class D chip. Yeah, you mentioned a well-designed power source. I am moving rapidly in the direction of doing my analog synthesizer days and diving into that. I'm excited about that and have things to show you today that will blow your mind. And not counted in what I can show you today is a power supply idea that I'm looking into. Basically, I am looking into getting a kind of power supply for relatively cheaply. All electronics has a 3 amp power supply that's 12 volts that is being sold for about $6. And I could well see whether I could beat them up on price and be able to get a quantity of them for less than that per unit so that I can pass them on as less than that per unit. But the idea is I want a power supply that is compatible with Moog power supplies, like the DFAM, the Mother 32. I've also got over here Here's a Werkstatt, a Moog Werkstatt. And the thing about this is the same deal. I believe that this is actually the same power supply wall wart that comes with the DFAM and the Mother 32, which are popular sort of semi-modulars. I hope so anyhow. I think that that is what it is, because I think it's just the same power supply every time. And their power supply is just a little over, it's like 1.2 amps rather than 3 amps. But I am looking for a third-party power supply. Where do you plug this in? And I'm going to check to see whether it can plug into the Moog output, or the power supply thing. And it has the right cable. Because if I can do that, that means that anybody that ever got a DFAM or a Mother 32, which are great fun, like if you can spare $600 or so for a starter synthesizer, that's made of win. They're really nice in many ways. And Werkstatt, you have to sort of put together yourself, not really build, but assemble yourself. And this is great fun, and you can get a power supply with it because it comes with one. They are 12 volts, center positive rather than center negative, like with guitar pedal power supplies. And I think also the hole in the barrel is slightly different size. I'm not positive about that though. So you don't mix these up with guitar power supplies. But 1.2 amps is enough to power a whole bunch of crazy chip designs and CMOS stuff. And if I can, like, if you have any of the Moog stuff, you probably have one. If you have any of the Moog stuff and built it into a Eurorack system, you have a spare one, because the Eurorack system powers the Moog thing, leaving this just sitting around unused. And that is of great interest. And also, if you can get a more high power capacity power supply and for reasonably cheaply, that's another backup. And the whole idea is to have stuff where hopefully you've already got some of the parts. Now, EasyKB is asking, how do I manage the power supply for my studio? Do I use it? I would like to have big honking UPSs, but one of the things is UPSs can contribute noise into the signal. So I'd like to have more UPSs for my actual computer stuff. Here in Bellows Falls, Vermont, power fails on me sometimes. It hasn't happened that much while I was streaming, but if I randomly drop off the internet and don't come back, it's probably because Green Mountain Power here in Vermont fell over again, or something happened to them. I don't use special grounding. I just use multiple power strips off of the outlets in the room. I don't use a one-to-one transformer. I'm not using anything fancy that way. I tend to consider it more along the lines of the units that you're building should do the power conditioning rather than requiring a bunch of audiophile grade like power supply systems. So essentially what I'm doing is using like the Heritage Audio, for instance. It's not picking up a lot of power supply noise because its power supply itself is very good at isolating problems in the power. And it's also on I think it might be on a different circuit. Like, one thing that you can do if you want to play things kind of interesting and you have the facility to be in a place where there's more than one circuit feeding your situation, and that might not be the case if you're in an apartment, but I'm in a place where if you have a giant long power strip patch cord, like a power strip where the cable goes 20 foot or so, and these do exist, I've got one, you can run that to an entirely different room and draw off of a different circuit, and then have your computer stuff going into a different power strip that's on a different circuit. In general, it's not a bad idea to have your computer gear drawing off of one power strip and circuit, and audio gear drawing off of a different power strip if you have a situation for doing that. So, as it's fairly normal to be running stuff off of a billion power strips all plugged into the wall, so choose which thing goes into which power strips. Like, plug your digital and your computer stuff into one power strip, and if you've got analog stuff, try plugging it into one that doesn't have the digital stuff plugged into that power strip, and that could possibly help you out. Now, before we scroll off of the thing, EB, yeah, you probably have a single coil pickup. That is not just about the computer. It'll do the same thing with light fixtures. It'll do the same thing about all manner of stuff. Basically, if you're recording things in a studio room or in a workroom where you've got all your gear and computers and stuff, you're probably going to have to set the guitar in a particular angle. Like, the reason I went to this angle is because I know that this angle is the angle that my single coil guitar needs to be to not be picking up off of the computer and to not be picking up background noise off of other things. And if I turn it like this, it'll be humming like crazy. So in a studio, doing recordings of a electric guitar, especially if it's not like heavily shielded or super hum canceling, you need to orient the guitar in relation to the interference fields around it to try to find the point where it's being as quiet as possible, because you're in sort of a hostile environment electromagnetically, and your guitar pickup will pick up computers near it. It will pick up fluorescent lights and things around it. And hum canceling can do something for that, but not perfectly. That is not a complete solution to that problem. So basically, if you're doing guitar or indeed any electric instrument work in an area like that, either you got to move the gear that's causing noise, or you got to orient the guitar in such a way that it's making the minimum noise. And this is normal. This is just how it has always been. Oh yeah, Foco, I hope you do like the glitch shifter update. I think that came out real good, and there's a lot of potential for people having fun with it. Let's see now. Yep, mixers and DIs and things. I do need to experiment some more with DIs myself so that I can start working on the passionately awaited guitar amp plugins. That said, I have a biquad update that's coming. I need to do a double and possibly a triple biquad so I can experiment with steeper but non-resonant filter shapes in hopes of doing versions of guitar sounds that use that. I'm convinced that some of what I need is going to be in the form of cascaded biquad filters, and that's why I need to make the some plugin updates. They're not really updates in the sense of they won't be reduxes, but just a form of the plugin where instead of putting two biquad instances one after another and having to set them exactly the same, it's two instances built into one, sharing all the controls. So you can sort of rough in a sound using things like filters and distortions and stuff to get a sense of what's going to be useful. And I need to build some of that. So that's coming, and that is going to have to happen before I start doing actual guitar sound things, because I feel that that's going to be relevant. I feel that is particularly because as we distort, I've got to be able to control the high overtones because they'll start aliasing immediately. And I'm not really interested in doing sort of modern guitar tones, as interesting as they can be. I'm more interested in doing kind of cleaner and softly overdriven tones that are very good at rejecting aliasing. I'm even working on a distortion algorithm that might help with that. But one of the things that needs to be in place before I move on that. Do I have a plug that can function as an auto leveler? Probably not exactly, but you can look into Surge and Surge Tide. Those are kind of like compression plugins, but they react very, very slowly. So you might see whether that does anything useful. I'm not sure whether Surge or Surge Tide would be the one that would be most useful to you. I haven't watched the videos that I made about them for a while. But those are more like levelers than compressors. They're very, very pure in tonal qualities. And they are also not especially popular because people don't find that useful generally. But there's uses for that. I am concerned that it wouldn't function properly as an auto leveler, that you might have very specific requirements for that Surge and Surge Tide would absolutely not produce. So I don't know. You can look into it though. Workflow question, is there a way to select a fader in an Airwindows plugin without moving it? That I don't know. That's going to be DAW dependent. That's going to depend upon the digital audio workstation that you're using, and I have no control over that. If you're in Logic, that would depend upon how you're doing the automation, and I just don't have enough experience doing that to be able to tell you. So the answer is I don't know. AB, I'm considering buying a large condenser called Luis from Ear Trumpet Labs to record original bluegrass. Have I tried it? Nope. No, I have not. That said, I do have mic recommendations. You've seen what I'm using, and you know that I'm such a small fry that these people don't seek me out and give me crap to use. Nobody is. Nobody is giving me anything to use. As you might imagine, look at the number of views that I get. No, obviously that's not the thing. But I'm a big Roswell fan. And it's not because I personally discovered this, but because some of my sound engineering friends tipped me off to this stuff. So when you're talking about a large condenser, I'm not really quite sure what your price range is. I'm using a Colares here, and that's like an Elam 251 knockoff, and I got it because I was going to go big and have a really fancy mic for vocals. And I justified it like, well, I do all of my talking to making plugin videos and Q&A so it can have constant use, so fair enough then. And since I do this for a living, I get to write it off, and so that kind of justifies it. But yeah, I would recommend the Mini K47. Look at some YouTube videos on that. It may or may not be a big name as far as people going on about it. Lots. Don't be fooled by that. Some of the folks in the old world of classic rock recording tip me off to that stuff. That's the thing. I went seeking advice on that kind of stuff in these places, going to like Terry Manning's forum and searching for what they were talking about in terms of getting microphones. And they were talking about these Mini K47s. And I have the technical background to know why they are good, rather than just that they are good. So I went and I checked them out, And I'm using them on my guitar to this day. Like, I've got a guitar, the guitar amp is plugged in through the isolation cab, and there is a Roswell Mini K47 on that guitar right now. It's plugged in and powered up because this microphone is powered up. I just have it turned down, and the amp is off, and the pedal board is off. But the reason the Mini K47 is an excellent choice for all manner of, because remember, the professionals who have done your great albums and wonderful stuff like that are often not the people on forums being like, well, this is the microphone and pre-combination that I would use on a banjo. It's like, that's not how professionals act. What the professionals do is isolate something that is really consistently high performance in all contexts and use that. Like William Whitman, who I quite like. I think he's pretty cool. He is a complete wise ass, but he's cool. Everybody advises the same two brands of preamplifiers if you're getting a serious microphone pre. You want API or Neve. SSL doesn't count. SSL is for mixing boards. For capturing stuff, API preamplifiers and Neve preamplifiers are the sort of gold standard. And they are not tube preamplifiers. They are transistor preamplifiers, but they are super high quality. They have special, certainly the APIs have special op amps for the purposes of being utterly pristine quality and incredibly low noise. And the APIs also have like double transformers. They have input and output transformers. The pre's are actually quite heavy. You're listening to one of them right now. And the flip side of that is, rather than finding the perfect pre for this particular guitar or something like that, often they will go for a microphone that just generally behaves optimally on everything that you show it to. And the Mini K47 is a good example of this because it's a broad range microphone with very low noise and very good performance. It is a large diaphragm condenser, but its high frequencies doesn't have a spike or peak in it. The high frequencies of the Mini K47 are really well behaved. They sound, they go right off into the supersonics, as you might imagine, but there is no glitter or overtone to them, so you can do anything with them. They're as flexible as using a ribbon microphone. So that is, I think that it scrolled off already. The talk about which microphone for bluegrass. I would say it's not a matter of which microphone for anything. It's when you can get into a position of having like a serious preamplifier and then get at least one or more than one if you need more than one. Go for like something like that. Something that is going to be generally flexible, and it should be adaptable to whatever you need. Honestly, there's a lot of stuff like that. I've made versions of Shure SM57s, and an SM57 is a really interesting thing because it is not a high-quality microphone. It's very colored, but it has certain things that it does super well. And since it is a simple passive part, if you use it with a super high-quality preamplifier, it steps up and performs very well. Like, it doesn't have any circuitry inside it to add noise. It's just a coil and a tiny little transformer in there. So what you do is you plug it into a super high quality preamplifier, and then your SM57 has really good behavior, the same tone that a 57 would normally have, but very little noise added. And that's how that stuff is done. So you can get into the game with just the high quality pre and some simple Shure dynamic mics to start you off with. And then you go to the Mini K47, which is about $300 worth of microphone or so, if I remember correctly. And you go to that for stepping up to a condenser mic that's a little bit more than your budget condenser mics, but is well worth it, and it's way, way less than getting fancy Neumanns or whatever. And that's because where I heard about this is people who are very used to using the Neumanns and whatever. They're like renting space in big old studios and getting to use their mic closets, so they know what they're doing. And those are the people that the Roswells are sitting well with. Those are the people that the Roswell stuff is impressing. Certainly the Mini K47. I can't guarantee that they're as excited about the Kalara as I just am. That's where that sits. Let me doing a little scrolling. Yeah, keeping vocals naturalistically consistent. There is also another plugin that I have that I should mention. It's subtle, but look into the plugin Curve and Recurve. Those are distinct, but they're essentially the same thing. Curve only pads down levels if they spike up a little bit. Recurve has a bit of a boost and is essentially the same thing. And they are very subtle volume level sort of neutralizers. They don't really compress very much, but they will kind of ride levels very, very, very subtly. So surge and surge tide, yes, but also see whether curve and recurve, which react much faster, are useful there. Hey, MS like this is how to use my console emulation plugins. Well, bear in mind, I have made a video, if I'm not mistaken, on the Airwindows starter kit. I would say look at that. The video of Airwindows starter kit is how to set up and use the console emulation stuff. Getting deeply into the weeds as far as all the variations that you can do is beyond the scope of that, but it will tell you how to basically set it up and what to do. Indeed, beginners and Airwindows starter kit go hand in hand. And Ian found the answer to selecting the fader. Cool. Hey. Well, I can see why you'd mention curve. Now I'm going to mention something else. Now that we've got like 24 viewers, it's time to get into the big breakthrough in the hardware design stuff. And this is what was on my poster frame. Here's how you put together a analog synth DIY for dirt cheap. Frederick's canvas stretcher bars, standard size. These have been made forever. This particular one, these are the ones that are of most interest. Frederick's 8-inch canvas stretcher bars. This cost me 55 cents. I believe that currently they're costing about $1 or so. In fact, I've ordered a pile of them because this is so good. And you sort of slot these together. This is not glued. I've just sort of slotted them together. And as you can see, if you pick the 8-inch width and put them together just normally, it overlaps the edges of a Eurorack thing or a solder core thing, which is Eurorack but done with this perf board stuff that you can get very cheaply. You can use a thumbtack to hold the thing on. Now, that doesn't power the Eurorack module because this isn't really a concept for how to make a Eurorack system and have your own case, because this is really more about building your own synthesizers from parts for dirt cheap. And I'm going to give you a little rundown on exactly what that means, because, as you can see, I have ordered in a bunch of this stuff. It's costing me about $1 per piece. This is 55 cents, 55 cents, and the 10-inch piece was 63 cents, meaning that, and there's two labels here. One of them I've got to remind me, if you were to go and find stretcher bars, they've got to be Frederick's standard stretcher bars. The heavy duty does not count. Other brands don't count. Has to be exactly this brand because it must be not less than 1/5/8 inch for the edges to overlap just enough. If you do that, you can solder, you'll be soldering this stuff together. Take a simple thumbtack or a staple or whatever, poke it through the holes into the stretcher bar, and it will hold the thing in place securely. I've got a Eurorack module here from Make Noise that is mounted onto this piece of wood this way. I could stack a bunch of them, and then as long as I could power them, that would work. It would run. This stuff is much cheaper than the actual Eurorack module. This stuff is how much of this perf board can you get in relevant sizes, and can you wire together stuff that would work and then mount it somehow. And this is how you'd mount it. You'd have push pins. You can get push pins for very cheaply as well. And you run it through one of the holes in the very end of the thing and into the pine of the stretcher bar. It's a nice solid area. Granted, if you had a whole bunch of the push pins, it's possible that you would split the wood. But I think if it's not like much denser than this, you'll be absolutely fine. This is pine wood, so it's not really brittle and hard. This is a 33 HP Eurorack compatible case for $2.36. I'm going to repeat that. This is $2.36 of wood that slots together like this and will hold Eurorack stuff as long as you can power it. And remember, I'm working on getting together power supply stuff. I'm checking out a 3 amp power supply that I found on All Electronics. And I have ordered a bunch of PC mount jacks that you'd plug this into, which means that you'd have this and the jack would be either on the front here or possibly on the back panel of the thing. And you'd plug the power supply in, and then you'd be wiring it to some of those IC sockets that you can plug little Bastel style jumper cables or lengths of simple 22 gauge solid core wire, which I've also ordered a bunch of that because I'm moving forward on this in a big way. And if you have a strip of IC sockets connected to the positive of the power supply thing, you've got a little bus bar that you can just plug wires into and power whatever you want elsewhere in the design. For your 33 HP, you'd have maybe a set of these strips, like here's one, here's another. They wouldn't have these jacks because you wouldn't be using this style of jack. You'd be using wires and IC sockets to do this stuff. There'd be one of these for the output maybe. And you'd have however many of these and would run your power supply from there to the power pins of whatever is powering this strip. And if you wanted to replace that one, you would take the push pins out, remove the strip, and replace it with whatever you'd want. It's modular like a Eurorack system. I got the wood from a art supply house. It's a basically your art supply stores. I'm not sure that necessarily you can go to like Michael's or whatever and automatically get this, but go to a art supply place where you'd be buying like brushes and paints and canvases and stuff, because this is the makings of canvases. You buy this stuff, put it together into whatever shape rectangle you want, stretch canvas over it, and as you can see, there's a bunch of staple holes here. I've already stretched canvas over this one. And you stretch the canvas over it and staple it in place. That's what this is for. This is a common thing. I don't think anybody has clued in to the fact that you can put your rack modules on this exact form factor. Now here's where it gets amusing. How many of you are familiar with the cost of your rack enclosures? Let's just say they're costly. They're great fun, but you're going to be spending hundreds or thousands of dollars, maybe not thousands of dollars. If you were doing multiple cases, maybe thousands of dollars, on the enclosure alone without any of the synthesizer parts in it. Now, granted, that does come with a power supply, but you can get a power supply for $6 or whatever if it's a wall wart. I'm getting the 3 amp power supplies that'll hopefully plug in like this as literally a wall wart from All Electronics. They got a bunch of them in surplus. You basically need to get the right kind of barrel. I'll check to make sure that it's the right kind of barrel and the right kind of plug and the right kind of jacks. And then you're just DC power and tip positive, barrel negative. And that's the kind that you power Moog stuff with, and that's the kind you're going to power my stuff with. You probably also build in either a fuse or like some 0.1 ohm resistors that will blow up if you wire stuff wrong, because that way you don't kill the actual power supply when it does, or when you short stuff together by mistake. So here's the thing. This is 33 HP. This is not terribly big. This is an 8x10. You can buy frames like this already. You could potentially buy canvases, take the canvas off, and have a frame that's exactly like this if they were built using the same Frederick's standard stretcher bars to assemble them. Anything that's using the Frederick's standard stretcher bars, because this is a company that's been making these for a kabillion years and they're still making them, and they're cheap wood extrusions that are machined to assemble together in this way. All of that is going to work. You just have to pick the 8-inch size to make this work. $2.36. But what if you want more than 33 HP? Well, we can go beyond that. Check it out. If you use the 14-inch width, that is 53 HP. It's still small enough to be convenient. There's a lot of space for your little slats of perf board to go on here, and it'll assemble exactly the same way. This is sturdy stuff. Like, these are not flimsy. They've been in business doing these for a reason, for a really long time. $3.42 for 53 HP. But supposing 53 HP, this is going to get funnier and funnier as I go on. 53 HP is not enough. Check it out. There is a 18-inch spreader bar that you can use. It is a stretcher bar. Spreader bar is a different other thing that we're not talking about right now. 72 HP, 8 inches up and down, 18 inches across. And the interesting thing about this one, other than it is 72 HP, is that this also, if you put rack ears on it, it would fit. You can't really see it here, but it fits almost exactly into a rack unit. The edges are just a little bit overlapping where the rack unit goes. So either if you shortened it down or like figured out some way to mount it, you could put sort of ears on it and mount this onto a 19-inch rack system. So you could get a pile of these, build up a bunch of them. In fact, I've ordered a bunch of the 18-inch as well. If I'm remembering correctly, me getting the 8-inch at the moment, and I'm getting them from Dick Blick, Dick Blick sells this stuff, but it sells it by the 50. It's $1 for the 8-inch by the 50, and something like $2 or $1.50 or something like that. This was $1.45 when I got it for the 18-inch size. So this fits in a 19-inch rack or road case or something like that. You just have to make some kind of ears to put on it so that you can use the rack screws and bolt it down. And this is $4. $4 for the wood to make this. Going by the, it might be a little closer to $5 or $6 if you were going to use Dick Blick's current prices on these parts. So, yep, $4 for 72 HP of Eurorack and solder core compatible mounting unit. But wait, why stop there? Granted, the 18-inch is the one that will fit into a rack unit, that you can come up with a way of making that work. I think it's possible that you'd have to like shave the edges off with a saw or something to really make it fit in, because it's just a little bit too wide to drop through the rack rails and have the rack ears mounted on it. But you know, this is pine. Pine is pretty easily carvable. You wouldn't want to cut too much away from the corners and stuff here, because this is how it's held together. Again, this is not glued. This is just slotted together. But it's very doable. And say we want more than 72 HP. Well, we can no longer fit this into a rack unit, but supposing you wanted to build a crazy solder core style synthesizer using this kind of design for having all of your CMOS chips and oscillators and stuff, and then powering it with something like this and plugging that in here somewhere, and then it's just wires and cables and things, all of which are very cheap. Chips are cheap. Chips are like 39 cents. The wire doesn't have to be expensive. This is all very doable. But this size is $2.36. So if you wanted to build one that was way bigger, yeah, electric planer would do it. Here's the thing. This is part of why I'm excited about this. You don't need a wood shop to assemble this. You can put these together with your bare hands and build these with your little soldering iron and solder them and wire them together, and then stick the thumbtacks in with your bare hands and have something that's reasonably solid and that you can actually use. You won't need a wood shop. You won't need electrical tools or even hand tools to a significant extent. And that's what makes this exciting. Because supposing you want 103 HP, well, you get the Frederick's 24-inch canvas stretcher bar. Standard size, same as before. As always, 8 inches in height. 24-inch stretcher bar will no longer fit into a rack, but you can pick it up with one hand and fit it into like a guitar case or something. This is not that inconvenient. And 103 HP, $4.78. You can fit a bunch of synthesizer boards that you made yourself onto this. But why do that when you can have even more? Check it out. This gets funnier and funnier. 163 HP. You can get, and I think this is the limit. I don't think you can get any bigger than that because they make a different shape of spreader bar for anything that big. You can still get a 36-inch standard stretcher bar. And that's what this is. And I got this way back in the day. I've always kept these. I kind of felt that they were always going to come in handy, but I never knew exactly how until now. This becomes a insane, long, skinny synthesizer. It's 163 HP of space for thumbtacking on just like this, all of the little modules that you make independently. They'll just go alongside each other. And 163 HP of stuff might actually use, a couple of amps with all the LEDs and things flashing, because we can get LEDs for 3 cents a piece. There's a lot of stuff that we can do with this. And 163 HP, price out Eurorack cases that can do that much. $7.62. 36-inch stretcher bar, $3.26. Now that's more expensive than the 55 cents that I paid for these. And if it's continuing to be more expensive, like the 55 turned into $1 when I was getting more of these. So I wouldn't be surprised if the 36-inch stretcher bars are no longer $3. Maybe they're like $4 or $5. Boom. And there's something else amusing about all of this, which is this is art frames. This is literally the kind of thing where you could take this, build your little thing, have your synthesizer, get some canvas, stretch it over the face of it and staple it down here, and then cut holes where you need to plug into it. You can have a kind of hybrid instrument art piece thing. And that seems like that would be all kinds of fun. So what you do is just sort of work through what you needed to do as far as making it interesting for yourself. And it's both a art piece and kind of hobby thing that you can do, and also a craft and thing that you could be selling at an Etsy or Reverb or something like that. Go like, okay, this is the particular sonic art piece that I made. It is made with archival quality visual arts stuff. So people who make canvases out of these stretcher bars are capable of making canvases that will sell for as much as the art is worth on them without concern that, oh, this is going to break or become useless, because it'll last. These are essentially archival. It's wood, so if you take care of it and don't do anything bad to it, that can kick around for hundreds of years. You're assembling it. It's assembled using these simple techniques, and nothing's going to happen to it. And you can get, and I have seen fit to get myself, I had one before, but I got rid of it, but I've got another. Things like plein air, which is spelled Plein air, easels for people who are making their little paintings and stuff, and they're going to stretch canvas on it, and then they'll rest it on the easel, and paint away on it. And there's a little box where you can keep your paints and things, and something like that. You can rest a synthesizer where the canvas would be placed. There's often clamps and things to hold it in place. And you could also, since it goes against a mast, you could have multiple ones and stack them on each other on this easel, and that's your performance stand. You're using relatively, because like a proper artist easel can go into the hundreds of dollars, and the cheaper ones are more like, $40 or $50 or so, but still they're not as cheap as this actual stretcher bar stuff is. But you can get stuff that is nice, and then you have a performance stand. You set it on the edge of the easel, you rest it up against the thing, and maybe power it using a battery pack that's in the drawer that the easel has that's meant to hold paints. So this is all coming together. This is all coming together really well. Adrian, I'm not sure that this is necessarily a great frame for a 300 rack box. It depends. Is a 300 rack box using this exact form factor, which is, I'm trying to remember whether they call it 3U or 5U or whatever. Let's see. Yeah. So fill me in on this because it escapes my memory at the moment. Is a 500 rack box exactly 3U? If so, then that's another thing that you could do, I guess. As far as making the rest of the box slot together, I don't have to make this. You can get this now. Frederick stretcher bars. You can get that like right now. This is not mysterious. It's just a form of material that's not been used for this purpose before. And I just stumbled across it, and I'm delighted with the discovery. I'm particularly delighted with the fact that you can use thumbtacks. There's a lot that you don't have to get if you can put stuff together for bits that are this cheap. But I don't know about the 500 box, because the thing is, like, my stuff is going to be powered with a wall wart, a Moog compatible wall wart. And I'm sure that will be very satisfactory, and I've been working it out. I know exactly how to do it. I can do it for basically pennies. All the relevant bits that you get, like for instance here, your rack modules are powered using this little header. This little header can cost as much as like 60 cents or so. It's a little pin header, then you have a little thing that it connects to, and you have to get these little ribbon cables, and by the time you're finished doing it, every power supply thing is going to cost you a couple of bucks. And if you're doing 163 HP of modules, and let's say all the modules are really tiny, like they're 2 HP or whatever, that's already a couple of $100 on power supply wires and connectors alone just to get power to the things. And I don't think that's necessary when you can have the power coming in and just wire it using wires, and you can get wire by the foot to a simple double inline pair socket, a dip socket. You have to pick the right socket, but it's still cheaper than doing it this other way. And then rather than using ribbon cables and having to get power cables made specially for you, you use 22 gauge solid core wire. You can get 22 gauge solid core wire for cheaply. So that's the thing. This is a method for getting large quantities of synthesizer stuff going for very cheaply, for being able to roll it yourself and not get stuck being like, oh, now I have to get $500 worth of knobs. Well, I guess I'm not doing this today. It's like, nope, there needs to be ways of making this all happen in an experimenter kind of way, and being able to do non-trivial, big-scale stuff for very, very, very cheaply. And I'm working it out. This is what I'm doing with my life at the moment, is working out how this whole system goes together. And if I can do that, other people can do it and use the results. So, Bo, you're asking me about the new distortion algorithm. There's not much to tell, really. I showed you this last week. This again. The deal there, do I have the right thing on? Yes, I do. Oh, but you can't really see it because the chat is covering it. So that's the idea for the new distortion algorithm, is a simple way to primitively upsample without it being too computationally expensive, and in such a way that I can just doctor it so that the output of it becomes a simple divide by 2 exercise. Like, take this, divide by 2, add it to the raw sample, done. And figuring out how to arrange it in such a way that you're still getting more or less the correct result. Any degree of anti-aliasing algorithm of that nature is going to be some helpfulness, and I'm willing to trade off super performance on that for being able to just use multiple stages of it and not have the plugin just kill your computer every time you try to use it. And I'm also particularly interested in the divide by 2 concept, because that, of course, is my word length shift gain plugin. And if I can do stuff that takes in the input audio and does a oversampling type algorithm that is not just super overprocessing, I might be able to hang on to some of the clarity that I like to get out of handling the incoming data words with more care and attention, rather than just like automatically we're going to multiply and divide everything by a kabillion things all over again and then it's all going to be fine. Generally, I find that no, when you're doing that much math on the signal, it's not always going to be fine. Instead, you're going to lose something, and it's really hard to tell what's being lost because it's so eroded away so subtly. M is building a 500 series EQ. We're thinking about it. The thing about building things like that, I do not know a schematic for you right now. I mean, 4-band parametric stereo, that's relatively complicated. I don't have a schematic for that. That said, seems like something that would be worth looking for. What you're going to be concerned about DIYing something like that is partly, are you happy with the fit and finish of whatever it is you're building? Like that's kind of the whole point of me building a thing like this. This goes completely beyond concerns of, did you pick the nice knobs or the bad knobs for this? Or did you have the nice faceplate? Like Make Noise has pretty nice faceplates. They are doing a thing which is aluminum faceplate here, and it's silk screened, and silk screen is also going to cost you a bunch of money. And getting something like this made ends up being heinously expensive. And even then, you're still going like, well, did you pick the nice knobs or did you pick knobs that are cheaper because you need to buy 500 of them? And if you design stuff in a completely different way, then those rules go out the window. You're no longer asking about knobs and potentiometers because you're doing things with like patching bare wires. And instead of talking about silk screening, you're talking about making designs using cut out electrical tape on the surface of this perf board stuff. Or as you can see on this, I've drawn on it with Sharpie markers. Black and silver Sharpie markers. And that's another way you can do it. But you put stuff like that together. I'm looking to have it be a little classier than, for instance, this one, which is just very crude Sharpie marker work. As you can see, there's a capacitor between these two because that's the symbol for a capacitor there. And this says ENV. And this says VCA. And there's a transformer, a fairly large telephone coupling transformer in here. And you can see the wires sticking through. building stuff like this, you get away from the requirements of having like a proper case, this and that. It becomes a sort of road warrior synthesizer design. Now, the other side of it is, what parts are you using for the signal path? And that's something that I'm able to go forwards with. Like, my crazy road warrior style synthesizers are going to look very strange, but the connections in them are going to be heavy 22 gauge solid core. So it will sound as big as essentially a Buchla. It'll sound as big as a Banana Jack based synthesizer, and arguably bigger than some of the Eurorack stuff, because the Eurorack stuff gets a little flimsy at times. And it's possible to have all the connections in something homebrewed like that able to carry like amps of current. The connections that I'm using and getting together for all of the power supplies, all of the audio paths, will all handle amperes of current. That's kind of what those are designed to do. They're designed to be able to power CPU chips that just suck huge quantities of current. As far as doing specifically a 500 series EQ, a lot of that is going to be capacitors and things, and you can purchase good quality capacitors for certainly cheaper than $800. They're not ever going to be super cheap. Like, getting a good quality film capacitor of a sufficiently large size might be on the order of $1 or $2 per cap. The other part is the non-passive parts, and that has also interesting discoveries. For instance, you can get op amplifiers that are, 39 cents or so. You can also spend like $3 for an op amplifier that's much higher performance. I've got a collection of op amplifiers of different kinds. Some of them I chose because you can restrict them and make them kind of your grungy old school op amps. Some of them I got because I knew that they were high quality. For instance, Analog Devices make a bunch of op amps that are good quality. And then if you wanted to go even farther, there are op amps that you can get that are plug-in replacements for existing op amps. So you can design with the cheap ones and then go for this later. You can get plug-in replacement op amps made with discrete parts. It winds up being, I don't think I have a good example for how I could show this. Instead of having the little chip that plugs into the dip socket, there is a sort of a riser and this funny little circuit board that's like 3 times the size of what the chip would be. So you have to be able to fit it in there. But you can plug in a dedicated, made out of discrete components, doing all the things that you can't do on the little plug-in chip op amp. And you can get those for, $10 or so? Maybe $30 or something? You can get the guts of your amplification stage and upgrade it to what would absolutely be as good as what's in the $800 EQ. I just can't tell you exactly what you would do to assemble it because I don't have the schematic. But essentially, if you DIY seriously enough, sound quality-wise, there's no limit to how far you can go. And I'm very enthusiastic about pushing this because I think it's worth knowing, I think it's worth doing, and if you know the right things about what to look for, what to get, then it's a very rewarding way to go. And again, that's the thing, is you can get things like, over in the other room, I've got some output transformers. And I'm calling them output transformers because that's technically what they're supposed to be. But what they really are is tube guitar amplifier reverb tank driver transformers. They are literally the cheapest, I'm trying to remember the name of the company. The cheapest transformer that you can get on the lines of about $18 or so each. But I have reason to believe that you could build the right kind of circuit around this, basically using the same thing as like building a guitar circuit, but rather than powering a speaker, you'd be using this just to take the inside of your synthesizer and run it through this transformer and take the balanced output and have a like professional quality plus 4 dB line level output that's balanced and it's transformer balanced. But if you were to get these transformers for this kind of purpose from the companies that make them for the audiophile and pro audio purposes, and I don't mean just like, Sony. For pro audio, what I'm talking about is like the big leaguers. That stuff can be like $50 a transformer. These are like 18. And I believe that it would work just about as well, because the guts of what makes a transformer amazing for an output stage, driving a line level output, is there's a number of things about it. One of them is core size. Miniaturizing it is bad. You lose bass. Maximum output power drops. But if you have something that would drive a reverb tank to loud volumes off of a tube stage, and you use that to drive a balanced output off of transistors or FETs or whatever it is that you're using, and get your balanced output using a transformer, which is the most high quality way of doing that, I don't think it would necessarily sound just like the $50 or up transformer that you find in the super expensive professional gear, but I think it'd be in the ballpark. It would get there. And these are the things that become interesting about the concept. These are the things that get you something where the DIY stuff starts making really good sense. Because not all of the circuits are difficult. Like here, I'll sketch out a circuit. I might have made it too big. I'm going to have to go back to where I can see my screen. Not quite. That's a circuit. What you see there is two capacitors. This is the shape of a capacitor. And one inductor. This is essentially a two-pole low pass. I'm using this circuit now in my modular synthesizer stuff that I'm continuing to work. I had to rearrange everything some more because I had set it up in a way that wasn't actually going to work, and then it just stopped. So now I've rearranged it so that it's a little closer to what I could do stuff with, and I'm probably going to fire that all up again. But I have a synthesizer output, which is my bass. Here, these are some fairly large capacitors, they're like 0.1 microfarad or something. And this is the inductor that I got, which I have ordered 1,680 more of them, because I got some to try, and I'm sufficiently satisfied with this. Inductors can cost like several dollars each. These ones are on the order of like 7 cents. They're a surplus. It's a inductor, and it is a toroidal core, meaning that it won't pick up background noise. And in general, this is going to be a very useful multi-purpose thing. Like I can have these in my power supply rails, all kinds of stuff like that. But in this case, this circuit is a super effective low pass. Having the one capacitor makes it 6 dB per octave, if I'm not mistaken. And each additional part, like the inductor, blocks highs, so that's also contributing to the steepness of the filter. The other capacitor rolls off more highs to ground, which is where this is. This is ground down here. And that also increases the steepness of the filter and also brings the frequency down a little bit. This connection of some wire and 3 parts has made my bass tone out of the synthesizers such that I can use a raw square wave output or a raw sawtooth wave output. And it winds up being a sort of rolled off reggaeton, deep bass. It's not letting gritty high frequency stuff through. And that is DIY EQ. And you would not be able to necessarily get as high quality a simple low pass out of the 500 series EQ for $800. Because part of what makes this be special is that this is a very, the wire in this inductor is really heavy. The connections are very simple. Everything about it is just very primitive, raw, and simple. It's not going to some circuit board. It's not going to through a bunch of weird little delicate wires or anything like that. So it gets a big, big sound. And that is kind of the true secret behind the DIYer type stuff, is that rather than being sunk into having to deal with other people's commercial manufacture or having to be like everything in the box and so on, you can build stuff, and you can build stuff that has a really heavy, beefy tone. It's quite possible to do. You just have to know how. And it's not necessarily more expensive to do that as long as you select the right parts to use. Boaz, has anyone seen Ahmed? Not today. I'm sure we will. I guess we'll see. Up thread a little bit, Rick Valcon is mentioning the cheap rack tables from IKEA fit 19-inch rack gear between the legs. You can put screws through the rack gears and into the legs. That is, I wonder how much wider, like, is there space to scooch the rack stuff from side to side any, or is it a really tight fit? Because the thing is, doing this kind of stuff, let's see. Here's our 72 HP of synthesizer space for 8-inch and 18-inch rack rails. It's possible that you could fit something like this also between the cheap IKEA table. What I'm wondering is whether it overlaps or fits smoothly between the legs, or whether in fact it goes across the legs, so you'd basically drill some holes maybe and just screw them directly onto the thing. Because again, this is all made out of pine, and it's very accessible for doing stuff with. Fair enough. Yeah, get back to me on exactly how that fits, because I know that rack rails usually are a little bit narrower than the space in the rack unit. There's always another I can tell you whether this will fit or not. What I'm seeing in the rack stuff that I have right in front of me is that I could sort of fit my finger between the rack rail and the edges of the case of the actual rack unit, because there are requirements for how wide the internal stuff gets to be. It can't go like literally right up to the rack rails. It's got to be about a third of an inch or so in from there. And that's your tolerances on whether you can fit stuff into the IKEA tables. So yeah, you can put screws through the rack gears into the legs. It's just a question of, could you fit this entire thing And if you have that, or you have one of those tables kicking around, I can give you a quick measurement of exactly how wide this is. And it's definitely a little wider than rack equipment has available for the box that fits into the thing. The faceplate isn't necessarily the same part. That's a different situation there. So yeah, there you have it. We have Glitch Shifter coming out. I'm working on firing up the old music thing a little bit more, because it's been like a month at least. Oh, pretty tight fit for 1 or 2 millimeters room between the stuff that has to fit inside, meaning that there's a degree of overlap beyond what an actual rack rail would be widthwise. In that case, since this rests on top of the rack rail, like this edge here is a little more than the space that fits on top of the rack rails, your IKEA tables would overlap this edge about this much, maybe. You could conceivably saw it, but you could also drill holes and mount it on the front edge of the IKEA table if you wanted. And then you wouldn't need rack ears because you just bolt it on, basically. I would also point out that since you can do that, you don't actually have to have the IKEA table with exactly the 19-inch size. For instance, you could go and find some kind of table where you could mount a set of these, 163 HP, and $7.62 for this. And that has nothing to do with the size of 19-inch rack rails. Instead, this becomes like a instrument. Play it and wire things and connect wires around. You would really be needing the 22 gauge solid core wire, because if your power supply is over here and you got to power a unit that's over there, you're going to be running a wire all the way down here. And if you had to do that with your rack cables or something like that, it would start getting expensive. But running simple length of solid core, not so much. What we're talking about, do I have any of this handy? Kind of, I do. So this is the stuff I'm getting some more of. A little blurry because doesn't actually fit here, but All Electronics sells this. It's a 22WT100S. Or to return to this camera, 22WT100S. It's from Consolidated Electronic Wire and Cable, and that's what All Electronics sells, because they make this stuff available, and they apparently just order a bunch of it. And then anytime anybody wants wire, you can get it from them. I've thought about talking to Consolidated Wire and Cable and going, how much for a 1,000-foot spool? Because the idea is figure out how much 100 foot of this costs. And then when you need wire, what we do is say you need to run the wire from here to here. Yep. Boom. Not difficult. And this is heavy enough wire. This is 22 gauge wire that it's not going to be a large voltage drop going this far. Not like if it was a circuit board. And it's not that expensive to get 100 foot of simple solid core like this. This is doable. It is achievable. It's so achievable that I've ordered a whole crapload of more rolls of this stuff because I'm getting going with it. I figure one of the things that I've been waiting on is when I start actually building it, I'm going to need to have multiple colors of wire. So I have got the canonical 10 colors of wire, which is the color codings that I also have on the vinyl electrical tape and the color codings that you use for color coding resistors. So it will become possible to go, okay, power wires are red wires. That means voltage plus. Control circuitry wires are like yellow wires, for instance. I'm still working out the details of what the color coding should be. Ground wires are, let's call them gray wires, or maybe we'll call them black wires or something like that. On my Eurorack rig, I have control circuitry and stuff that is just permanently wired up as all white wires. But I'm thinking of doing it over again or just updating it so that my control wires are white wires, much like this. And that becomes just, these are trigger pulses, these are timing, this is control circuitry, typically digital control circuitry, and that's what the white wire means. But if I'm running audio, that could be like red or blue or something like that. And I can color code that with the full range of colors available so that that tells a story as well. What I'm doing with the colors of the actual Eurorack cables is mostly just to have color-coded outputs. So I'll be going like, okay, this is the blue channel in my mixer. And so I'm using blue wires to go to it. And I can look for what's patched into that channel and go like, okay, this is blue, therefore this is patched into this thing, and this is part of what's making this work. And it lets me look it up a little bit more easily. And that's part of the reason for getting a whole bunch of solid core like this in multiple colors so that I can run off like 20 feet or so for people and throw it in a box, and then you also can have it. Or you could always just buy it from All Electronics. I'm going to make that very obvious as to where you get this stuff. You shouldn't necessarily have to wait for me to be moving on it. Instead, I will provide all of my sources, and then if you're really excited, you can join me even before I start making it go public and start distributing this stuff just by getting the same stuff that I said to get. I think that's usually the way of doing the DIY, is people going like, wow, I want to do this with you, so where do I go for what to get? And I'll tell you where to go for what to get. As far as the giant synthesizer that will end up on this, assuming I use this, you could mount it on an old iron board, but the thing about it is it's going to be this large plank of perf board, not continuous, because there's no reason to have it be continuous when you can do it in a modular way and update stuff as you go. But once you've got that thumbtacked onto this board, and you've got your front stuff with the wires and things connecting it together, and you've got additional connections on the back, like wiring up all of the chips and things to what you need, and maybe some parts on the back that are more conveniently located there, and everything has cajillions of LEDs all over it because those are cheap. You can rest this on a art stand. Get an artist's easel. And it has this little shelf. And it has feet, kind of like my camera stand there. You can fold up the artist's easel and then you unfold it and stick out the feet, and your synthesizer sits there. You can perform on that. You can have it be up where you're standing and being able to reach it. Or just stand it up on end if you prefer. If you have something that can fit, 3-foot canvases, you can get art stands like plein air easels where you could sit this on the bottom shelf and have a top clamp holding the top of it together so it would be sturdily mounted on that, and then you'd be able to go from there. These are not like the capacity of taking it and rather than having it be thoroughly Road Warrior style, it's mounted on an old ironing board, it's mounted on this or that, I made it on a piece of rusty iron pipe. Turns out, if you go about it right, you can start rating the art supply stores and being like, okay, this area has a lot of circuitry that I don't need access to. It's just doing useful things and the output comes over here. So I'm going to take a strip of canvas and staple it on, and the canvas stretches across there, and I'm going to paint something on the canvas. You can do all manner of things like that. And the more you lean in that direction and use things like artists' easels to hold it in place, the more you're kind of cross-pollinating visual arts and painting with synthesizer design and music. And it can be, on the one hand, very like sketchy and crazy. Rather than nice little aluminum panels like this, we're all perf board because that is a substrate for building stuff on, and it's adequate, and it's also way cheaper than having stuff screen printed on, and having to do professional quality faceplates for everything becomes impossible. It's too much. But it should be possible to use this aesthetic and just drag it in different directions. You're going like, okay, rather than being nice aluminum faceplates and all printed and stuff, we're doing a hand-painted look, and some of our faceplates are stretched canvas on this canvas stretcher, and it's covering over areas that don't need to be seen, or covering over the whole thing maybe. And then we've got our wires and connections and things, the usable surface. Like, for instance, I've got all of these trim pots. That's potentiometers. These are potentiometers, but the total of everything in these potentiometers costs a couple of bucks or more, depending upon how big they are, depending upon how fancy of a knob you're using, and so on. Trim pots can be much more cheap, but they're tiny. And the bit that turns is tiny. You have to use a screwdriver. So you could either use a screwdriver or you could glue a pile of perf board on there so that it's a bigger thing that you can reach and turn. As long as there's space to do it. You can glue a wooden knob onto it. It'll be fragile because the trim pot is tiny and easily broken if you wrench it around. But so you make something that's a little more delicate. You don't have to have a real knob. You could have a big feather. And you glue the feather onto the trim pot. And a feather is delicate as well, but so what? And if the feather points vertically, it means this, and then that's your filter sweep. And you're going twist and turning the feather because that's your ability for turning the trim pot with your bare hands rather than a screwdriver, is you glued something onto it that you can reach and manipulate. It's all a matter of taking things in unexpected directions. And it's very much a matter of taking things in unexpected directions that are cool rather than just lame as hell. I wonder if I... Hang on a second. Oh, I know. Hi. I'm going to be searching for something over here now. Got that. I can show that. What about this? That's a little skinny. There's something. Okay, that's not the one either. I'm looking for something I built. Maybe it's still down here. I'm not sure if I'm going to find it. That's unfortunate. Dang it. Where could that have gone? Oh well. I didn't find the thing, but here's more stuff that I built. So this is a early connection. This goes next to a Moog Mother 32. And this is an input. It's a chip. You can see some of the stuff on it, but my close-up camera is actually not well suited. What I need to do is raise that up and have some kind of little box that I can put paper stuff on so that I can position things like this under it. And the input comes in here. There's a bare wire that goes directly to the chip. And then the chip is wired in various ways. It's a flip-flop chip. And I actually have a heavy bus wire on this, but this is heavier than you need. This is like house current wire, and the 22 gauge would be quite satisfactory. And also these wires that are colored are not as heavy as the 22 gauge. So it's a work in progress. It's figuring these things out bit by bit. And as you can see, I have the jack here. That costs like 50 cents all by itself because this is a Eurorack module. But it's not using any other parts other than wire and the chips and the jacks. And then I've got this S, which means sub-octave. And this is 1 octave down, and this is 2 octaves down. If you run the right kind of signal into this, it does actually work. And when it doesn't actually work, it gets glitchy and weird, and you know that that's always more fun. This is a different formulation. It's just as doable. This is stuff called lincane. It is aluminum stuff. And you can make it into roughly Eurorack compatible, but it looks way more Road Warrior. And what this is a set of resistors connecting these jacks together. Like these have resistors connecting them all, and the switches bring in the center one to put an offset voltage on these guys. This connects through to here, this connects through to here, and then you can also switch in the center one and apply an additional voltage to either of these from this central jack. So there's another thing, and it looks incredibly sketchy. It is using vinyl tape for labeling, but it's also using silver Sharpie. That's something that the Look No Computer guy likes doing, is having black face plates and silver Sharpie. This is essentially a 2 HP wide piece of perf board with a passive mult with resistance between everything. And the jacks are considerably wider than the actual perf board is. Beyond that, it's pretty boring. It's just a mult. It just connects these together. But there's resistors between each one, so the resistance between these two is greater than these. It sort of spreads out in either direction. What I was looking for was the one that looked like this, and it had some trim pots on it, and I had glued pieces of perf board to the trim pots so that there was a little wand sticking out that you could turn, and that made it accessible without a screwdriver. So I've actually built that, and I used trim pot. I used perf board to do it and make the handle on the trim pot. Does actually work. Looked kind of sketchy. I think that maybe using literally a feather would be more interesting. And speaking of making things look nice, here is yet another experiment. And I've got a lot of this material as well. Mahogany. This design is jacks wired together. It's a bunch of arrangements of capacitors. These are capacitors. And there's holes drilled in the mahogany, and then I just glued it in, and I finished the mahogany with first an oil finish to make it darker, and then after that a satin polyurethane finish. And this one has screws included in it because I had to carve away areas for the screws, otherwise it wouldn't even attach. This turned out to be a pretty sketchy. Speaking of sketchy, I just dropped the screw into my keyboard. Come on, come on. There we go. This ended up being pretty sketchy, but as you can see, you could also use pieces of mahogany, and instead of these screws, use your thumbtacks or whatever, or simply glue it together and make a like fancy hardwood type of synthesizer, also out of modular pieces, kind of like that. Or you could take pieces of mahogany and use those for your handles on the trim pots. That would be quite doable, and it might be a little more appealing. You could probably hide the entire trim pot with a little wedge of carved wood that was finished nicely, and then you just glue it on there, and it's like, oh, okay, this trim pot has a carved wood knob, because why not? All of this, we're going to be exploring all of this stuff. Oh, and I grabbed this and didn't bring it in. This is my inspiration for the whole shebang, which is Bastel Castel, that uses the same kind of plugs and mounting that I'm going to be using. And it's a simple little circuit board that you can build. I made a Eurorec power for it. And I have all these jacks, but you could simply just take the units themselves and build them into this kind of rig. Or indeed figure out how to clone the schematic and build your own, except for that the Bastel Castel are little CPUs that come pre-programmed by Bastel. So in a way it would be better to use their bits. Anyways, it is 12:53. I have run longer than I technically had to, but this was interesting stuff. And I'm in the middle of building all manner of stuff. Andy isn't here to ask what I'm going to put out next week. I'm probably not going to put out anything exciting next week. I'm thinking maybe the biquad, the biquad double gang thing, which will give you steeper biquad effects without as much resonance. I'm thinking maybe something like that. We'll see. Anyways, on that note, what I will do is say bye to folks. I think that they're figuring out that the time is running short. And I will talk to you folks later. I'll see you next week, and I may or may not be doing something within the week, but I'll certainly see you next Monday. And as you can see, stuff is getting more and more interesting as we go. On that note, I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.